Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Andrew Missick, and welcome to this episode of Voice of the Word, in which I'm beginning a new series on an introduction to Aramaic studies.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
So, in today's program, we're going to talk about Aramaic, what it is, and its relationship. We'll start with its relationship to Hebrew. So, Aramaic is a Semitic language. It's like, well, what does that mean? What is a Semitic language? So you have a family of related languages, the Semitic languages. And these languages are all similar because they have a common origin. And linguists have tried to reconstruct the original Semitic language, which they call Proto-Semitic. And this language is a prehistoric language, but it developed into language which are spoken today. Now, the earliest attested Semitic language is Akkadian, and this is the language of the Babylonians and the Assyrians, but there are other different groups of Semitic languages that developed, such as we have the Canaanite languages, and linguists identify Hebrew as a Canaanite language. And you also have Phoenician and Ugaritic and Punic, the language of Carthage. Of course, out of these languages, only Hebrew is still spoken. Now, what's the relationship between Hebrew and Aramaic? These two languages are related. There's a lot of cognates. Actually, they share some vocabulary. The grammatical structure is a little bit different, but they are closely related languages. So even though they're closely related, Aramaic is not a dialect of Hebrew. Hebrew is not a dialect of Aramaic. These two languages evolved independently, even though closely related, out of the now extinct Proto-Semitic language. So they are closely related. There's a lot of similarities. They share vocabulary, but they're two separate languages. An equivalent would be perhaps like Latin evolved into Spanish and Portuguese. Now, there's a lot of similarities between Spanish and Portuguese, but they're two distinct languages that evolved separately. Now, for other Semitic languages that are important, of course, what languages are spoken today? You have Arabic is probably the most widely spoken Semitic language, and you have the Maltese language spoken in Malta, which is derived from Arabic. What had happened is during the Muslim conquest, Muslims conquered Malta and Sicily. So you had Sicilian Arabic, which died out, but Maltese is still spoken. There's a lot of battles over this as the Islamic Empire was growing. The Christian world finally began fighting back and having a reconquista. So Malta was liberated from Muslim rule, and the Catholic liberators gave the inhabitants a choice. You can stay, if you want to stay here, you have to be Christian. If you want to still be Muslim and practice that religion, you have to go. And so those who are devoted to Islam, so Maltese is very similar to Tunisian Arabic, by the way, or Maghrabi Arabic. Ethiopic is an important Semitic language as well. There's actually South Arabian languages like Sukatri. They're not non-Arabic Arabian languages. So, of course, the dominant languages we have is Arabic and Hebrew, but you have Maltese, Ethiopic. So there are different Semitic languages spoken. Now, according to tradition, the Jewish tradition was divided. What is the language of God? What is the language of the Garden of Eden? A lot of rabbis thought it was Hebrew, but some rabbis thought it was Aramaic. But as we see, both Hebrew and Aramaic evolved out of an extinct prehistoric language which scholars call Proto-Semitic. So, why is this important? Why is Aramaic important? Now, Aramaic is still spoken by Assyrian Christians and other Christian groups. How much longer is this language going to be spoken? We've had basically a large-scale, recent. There were over 1 million Christians in Iraq before the global war on terrorism. I served in the global war on terrorism. With the rise of ISIS, you had ethnic cleansing and genocide, and over half of all Christians in that region have left, and that, of course, imperils the survival of the language. You have pockets of Aramaic speakers here in the United States, in Chicago, now in Arizona, in Central California. So the Bible's written in 3 languages, right? Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And Hebrew and Aramaic are both Semitic languages, as we established. Greek is an what they call an Indo-European language. This used to be called Aryan languages, but that term was misused by the socialist groups in Germany. National Socialists kind of gave this a bad connotation, which it doesn't really possess. So now, instead of using the original term Aryan, since it's got a lot of negative connotations and is misinterpreted, they say Indo-European, because a lot of languages of India are derived from or are Aryan languages, so Indo-European. And this is a very successful and large language family. So the Romance languages are Indo-European. The Germanic languages are Indo-European. The Slavic languages are Indo-European. And Iranian languages like Farsi, Kurdish, Pashto, and Dari. So these are just some of the major Indo-European language families. So Greek is, of course, a very important Indo-European language. So really quick, we're going to talk about, this is a complicated issue. It's settled. The Bible, the New Testament, says that Jesus spoke Aramaic. It's not really disputable. Jesus and the apostles spoke Aramaic. But people don't want to believe, this really bothers me, that people come up with their fantasies. There's things they want to believe about biblical times or history, and they try to rewrite history to suit their likes. For instance, I can kind of understand it, because you get somebody that studies Greek, learns about the Greek culture, and it's very important. Western civilization, as it exists today, it's formulated in, Athens. Western European civilization. Western civilization is based, of course, on the Greco-Roman civilization culture mixed with this Christianity that made Western civilization for what it is. But let's just say you're a scholar, and you study Greek, you master Greek, and you come to love it. It's spent a lot of time studying this language. It is the language of the New Testament, and then you love this language so much you want to start believing things about it that aren't true. That this must be the language of Christ and the apostles as well. Now, Paul the apostle wrote in Greek. And the Gospels, as we have them, are written in Greek. Now, this will be an entire other lecture, but about the Aramaic New Testament. I'll talk about it a little bit right now. But there are Aramaic manuscripts. Do we have original editions of the Aramaic Bible? Not to my knowledge. But the Church Fathers had Aramaic New Testaments. But when the Muslims took over and burned the library of Caesarea, just destroyed it, we lost I mean, there could be a sensational new discovery. You never know. But like I said, people have misconceptions about about Semitic languages, about Hebrew. It's like the Philistines spoke Hebrew. The Moabites, the Ammonites spoke Hebrew. As I mentioned, I mean, the Amorites, all these people were Hebrew speakers. The Phoenicians were Hebrew speakers. The Canaanite language. And in the Bible, Hebrew is never called Hebrew. That's our name for that language. In the Bible, it's called Canaanite, which is what scholars call it today because it's they also call it the Judean language or Canaanite. That's what the language is called in the Bible itself. But Hebrew is the name we give to the language of the Old Testament. Now, the book of Daniel and Ezra are written partially in Aramaic. So like the Old Testament is like, it's probably like more like 96% Hebrew, but with Daniel, Ezra, a word or expression, I think Genesis has got an Aramaic word. Jeremiah has an Aramaic verse, but of course, even though there's Aramaic sections, mostly Daniel and Ezra, the bulk of the Old Testament is written in Hebrew. So I'm saying that Jesus spoke Aramaic. Where do you get that from? Like I said, from the Bible itself. Let's take some examples. Like Jesus's disciples. Thomas. That's from the Aramaic word for twin. Martha. Mar is a sir or a lord. Martha is a lady. So, names like Barnabas, the son of encouragement. Bar is an Aramaic for son of, in that dialect that Jesus spoke. Jesus uses, like in the book of Daniel, I have a prophecy of a Christ figure called the Son of Man. In Aramaic, it's in Daniel, it's like Baranash. But it became like Barnasha, which means a person or a human being. Barnasha. And Jesus uses that Aramaic figure of speech very often. So to understand what Jesus is saying when he's saying Son of Man, the best way to understand that is through the Aramaic. It's an Aramaic figure of speech. Aramaisms. That's what scholars call these things sometimes. Aramaeanisms, which is Aramaic figures of speech. When Jesus is on the cross, he says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Now, people might not want to hear this, but it's true. The word Allah is based on the word Elohim, right? We can see Allah. In Aramaic, it's Allaha. That's how they say God. Elohim becomes Allaha, becomes Allah. And in the book of Daniel, Daniel calls God, sometimes they spell it this way, A-L-A-W, Allah. It sounds like Allah to me. In Maltese, they call God Allah. Coptic Christians call God Allah. They use other words for God as well. But we shouldn't be hung up on the word for God. What we should understand is the attributes of God. So, is the God of Islam the God of the Bible? Some people say yes, some people say no. I would say no, because understanding of God is God as Father, a concept Islam rejects. Jesus, what God is, Jesus composes that, is partially composed of Jesus, right? This is our understanding of the nature and attributes of God is different from Islam. But in Matthew's gospel, it says Eli, which, that's the Hebrew form. Then it says lama sabachthani. So sabachthani is Aramaic, clearly. I think azabtani is the Hebrew word, which is not used. Sabachthani means forsaken, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? And of course, there's a deep reason why Jesus is saying this. He's quoting from Psalm 22 in Aramaic. So, there's a lot of information in this class. I just want to look at some details. Now, let's just say, there's a lot more evidence that Jesus spoke and the apostles spoke Aramaic. A lot of Aramaic words in the Gospels, in the book of Acts, and another word used, Maranatha. This is still good modern Aramaic too. Maran, our Lord has come. Who is the Lord? Our God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, when I was a kid, we had this little toy, and it was like it's kind of like a little trivia pursuit thing. You had these little dials on it, and I was a kid in Tennessee, and it had various trivia questions, and for some reason, one stuck in my mind. It's like I don't know, here's the first, just common knowledge questions, but anyway, like who's the second president, the 11th president, whatever. So one of the questions is, what was the language of Jesus? I was like, I don't know, Hebrew, and flipped it over, Aramaic. And then my mother, she found an article about, in the news, every once in a while they carry stories about Aramaic-speaking villages in the Middle East. And it's about Malula. Later on, I went to Malula, and it was talking about there's a Christian village in the Middle East outside of Damascus where Western Aramaic is still spoken. So later on, when I really started getting into the study of Aramaic, there's a scholar called F.F. Bruce. He's passed away probably 30, 40 years ago. He's a Plymouth Brethren theologian, a very good Bible scholar. And the problem with Bible scholars is they don't want to relate to the masses, right? A lot of biblical scholarship is written in very technical jargon where you can't make heads or tails of it, right? It's like, I want to study the Bible and church history, and they write these books that are like unreadable, and they're trying to make scholarship inaccessible to the masses. But I thought F.F. Bruce was a good writer, even though he's scholarly, it's accessible to a general audience. And a lot of scholars, they don't write for a general audience, they write for their peers. They use sophisticated technical language so people can't engage scholarship. They don't want the masses to engage scholarship. They just want accolades, and they want to impress their fellow scholars. But F.F. Bruce is he's one of these few Bible scholars who writes scholarly materials, but also he writes in a way that is accessible to a general reading audience. So he wrote a book called, which I think is still a good book, it's called The Books and the Parchments. And the title is derived from Paul's epistle to Timothy. Paul's in Rome awaiting trial, and he writes this letter to Timothy. Timothy, please come and visit me, and I left some books and materials behind, bring them to me. So this book is really about the textual traditions of the Bible, text of the Bible, right? So it's got a lot of information about, how modern Bible scholars, translate the Bible, because you have to consult a large manuscript tradition. I thought this was a good book. I'd recommend it. And he had Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, first 3 chapters. And he talks about the Latin Bible, other important textual traditions in there. It's a good overview. But he had a chapter about the Targums. And then he had a chapter about the Syriac Bible. And what had happened is apparently there's a transition among the Jewish people when they went to... This is kind of an oversimplification because Hebrew was still spoken. Hebrew became less and less widely spoken, and Aramaic became more of a dominant language, especially during the Babylonian captivity. Right, the Babylonians come, they destroy the temple, and they take all the elites, all the educated people. Anybody had a skill, they just left subsistent farmers. Anybody had any money, resources, education, skills, they took them all into exile in Babylonia. And some people fled to Egypt, but only the lower classes, very impoverished people, were left behind. Anybody had any education or finances, the land was depopulated. So under Cyrus the Persian, he conquers the Roman Empire, and he allows the Jews, first under Zerubbabel, later under Ezra and Nehemiah, the Jews go back to reestablish themselves in their ancestral homeland and rebuild the temple. And during that period, you have Hebrew is not as widely spoken as it was before. So they needed to have the Bible in Aramaic. So pretty much the entire Bible is translated into Aramaic. And Jewish versions of the Bible, the Old Testament in Aramaic, are called the Targums, which means translations. they also had a practice of, they still use Targums to this day. It's a very deeply established Jewish tradition. So you go to synagogue and they'd read the Bible in Hebrew, but then they give an interpretation in Aramaic. And these were paraphrases. And these are important because there's a lot of places where the Hebrew is obscure. The Masoretic text, people don't like to realize this fact, is that the Masoretic text of the Old Testament is the complete Old Testament. But these people, the Masoretes, they altered the Hebrew text in certain places. They did, especially prophecies about Jesus. And we know that because of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've found that the Dead Sea Scrolls are from the time of Jesus, and they show that the Masoretic text, you have what Jeremiah calls the lying pen of the scribe. Now, Christians, we had our own Hebrew, the hexapla of origin. He had the Hebrew, then he had it transliterated. Like I said, a lot of that, when the Muslims took over Caesarea, burned the city down, a lot of important ancient information from the ancient world and biblical manuscripts were destroyed by the Muslims forever. The early church fathers had access to this information. So anyway, and the other thing is our oldest Hebrew scrolls are like from the 960s. So when we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we're finding Hebrew manuscripts 1,000 years older than the Masoretic texts. So the Greek Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate are important because they're older. They're actually older than the Masoretic Hebrew text. And the Latin Vulgate was translated by Jews for Jews, used by Christians. Latin Vulgate was translated by Jerome from the Hebrew. He learned Hebrew in the Holy Land. But the Latin Vulgate also is much more older than the Masoretic text. So these issues are kind of explored in F.F. Bruce's book. But since there are places where there's scribal errors, and there's deliberate changes, and Hebrew died out, and some of it's kind of obscure, and the Targums are helpful. These translations are helpful, and honestly, modern Bible translators have to consult the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Syriac Peshitta, which we'll talk about in a minute. They have to consult the manuscript tradition has to be consulted because, like I said, the scribes altered the text. They made scribal errors, and this is a late manuscript. They're older, non-Hebrew, but older manuscripts. Well, now the thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls, some books are complete, but many of them are in fragments. There's several sections missing. We're talking about 2,000-year-old scrolls that had deterioration. Time took its toll on some of the scrolls. Some are very well preserved, some others less so. So, these would be the most important biblical scrolls we have. Of course, it predates. This is a product of rabbinic Judaism. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, is a product of ancient Jewish scholarship, Latin Vulgate, and so F.F. Bruce had a chapter about the Targums. Then he had another chapter on the Syriac Bible. And I got some copies of the Syriac Bible I'm going to look at here and show you. This is by Janet M. Magaria, and this is an interlinear. You take a look at this. This is her interlinear Bible, and she shows each Aramaic word with a translation in English, and here she has concordance numbers because she has a concordance and a dictionary to help you understand each of the words. Now, before that was made, we had, this is hard to get a hold of, but this is the Way International. They also did an interlinear Bible. I think I like what John McGurry did because you see each word in isolation. So, I'll have to continue this in the next episode. I'm going to try to do an episode per week, but the Old Testament, the Syriac Peshitta, the scholars believe was translated by Jews, and of course used by the Christians, and the oldest translation of the Bible into any language is the Syriac New Testament, the oldest translation of the New Testament in any language. It's translated back from Greek back into the language that Jesus spoke, into Aramaic, and this is a very important ancient witness. And also, we can see its intrinsic value because we can read the words of Jesus in the language in which he spoke. And hopefully I'll be able to do this really quick. But this is also about ancient church traditions. we're going to look at the Jerusalem cross, and I'll explain this. So, what are the 4 ancient Christian traditions? Latin, Greek, Coptic, Ethiopic, and then Syriac Aramaic. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic. So, with the Syriac churches, we have the Syrian Orthodox Church, which used to be called the Jacobite Church. And then we have the Assyrian Church of the East, which was, perhaps incorrectly, called the Nestorian Church in the past. And this is part of the Aramaic Christian tradition. And to me, the Assyrian Church of the East is very, very interesting because this is a very active church, and they're very evangelistic and missionary minded. They took the gospel to the far reaches of the world. And by the year 636, they were preaching in the court of the Emperor of China, and Christian communities which were founded by the Apostle Thomas, so-called Doubting Thomas. But these communities were maintained and nurtured and grown, probably by further settlements as well, by Assyrian Christians. And I've been to India visiting the Aramaic Christian communities there as well. So hopefully I'm going to put out a new program, A Voice of the Word, every week. So hopefully you can join us on these programs as we examine Aramaic as a language of Jesus and the significance of Aramaic and the significance of the Assyrian Aramaic Christian tradition. So join us next time, and hopefully I'll have some other videos up. Check out my Rumble channel as well. It's like the censors of YouTube are trying to, they're pursuing me to cancel and deplatform me. So I don't know when they're going to track me down here and erase all my videos. It's not funny. This shouldn't happen in the United States of America, but under the Biden administration is when it's really geared up, censorship and the loss of free speech in America. And this content you're seeing here is typical content of me. I don't understand why they want to silence me, but that's what Google and YouTube want to do. So please like, share, and subscribe so I can rebuild an audience. Used to have 5,000 subscribers, and being censored, canceled, deplatformed, I lost all that. Hopefully I can build it up again. But this is important information we'll try to make accessible to a greater audience so people can grow and nurture and admonition of the Lord and expand our understanding of Christianity, who Jesus was, and the like I said, you have an entire church tradition, an Aramaic church tradition, which is unique and apostolic. And I think we can learn a lot from that. So, thank you, and God bless you.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.